So hello, I'm Dr. Malinka Kilgore-Cardona. I'm the map curator at the Texas General Land Office, and I'd like to welcome you to this afternoon session. Early Efforts to Save the Alamo, Adina de Zavala, and Clara Driscoll. This session is graciously sponsored by the Texas Map Society. If you guys have not been yet, the Texas Map Society does have a booth at the back. If you turn around, Brenda's waving, so you guys can see that. I've been a member of the organization for a long time. I highly recommend you guys joining, so thank you to them. And also Barry Ruderman Rare Maps. I don't know if Alex Clausen is in here. Maybe not, but we also like to thank them. You can visit their site at raremaps.com and check out some of their wonderful things. So this afternoon, we've got quite a panel for you. The efforts by these two women, Adina de Zavala and Clara Driscoll, to save the Alamo at the beginning of the 20th century were intense. And their well-publicized disagreements over how it should be saved was dubbed in some articles the second battle for the Alamo. So I think we have quite a good discussion that's going to happen here today after these presentations, and hopefully no third Battle of the Alamo is going to ensue. So a couple of things, I'd like to ask you, if you haven't done so already, please silence all your electronic devices. We are going to take questions after each of the papers, and if we have time, we'll bring both presenters up at the end so we can ask questions of both of them. So our first speaker this afternoon is Suzanne Seifert. Suzanne is the Executive Director of Communications, Public Relations, and Marketing for Tarrant County College District, the nation's 12th largest higher education institution. She earned her BA in English and American Studies from the University of Texas at Austin, and an MA in History from the University of Texas at Arlington, go Mavs, where she was named University Scholar in 2011, and she was the winner of the George Wolfskill U.S. History Essay Award Graduate Division by Phi Alpha Theta, the History Honor Society. Suzanne's master's thesis on Adina de Zavala, titled Missed Identity, Collective Memory, Adina de Zavala, and the Tejana Heroine Who Wasn't, explores de Zavala's ability to transcend the structured social spheres of the earliest 20th century and to enter into the realms of Texas elites like Clara Driscoll. It also documents the beginning of de Zavala's dedication of her life to the preservation of Texas history. Please join me in welcoming Suzanne to the podium for her talk today, To Be Great is to Be Misunderstood, How Adina de Zavala Used Historic Preservation to Become Infamous. Suzanne?
Okay, I think I'm too tall. Good afternoon. Let me get situated just a second. It is a true honor to be here with all of you. I'm a little bit nervous, so kind of bear with me. Jim and I have already decided that we're not going to entertain a celebrity smackdown. We're going to be very polite. Hopefully, you'll walk away from this session with a better understanding of both what Clara did and what Adina de Zavala did to not only save the Alamo, but impact that they had in other spheres of their lives. I'm not a professional historian. I happened to get my master's in history. The first time I wrote about Adina de Zavala was the first graduate class that I took, and it was for a Texas history class, and I wanted to do something about interesting women in Texas history. And so, thank God for Google. This was in the this is like 2007, and I discovered through combing through lots and lots of articles, this woman, Adina de Zavala. Now, what was interesting is I grew up in San Antonio in the 1970s, where before Ross Perot stopped school kids going on field trips, every year we dutifully went to the Alamo, to all 6 of the missions, to the Spanish governor's palace, and that just became part and parcel of our education. Not once in any of those years did I hear the name Adina de Zavala. Did hear the name Clara Driscoll. You can't help but see the plaque when you walk into the long barracks that she saved the Alamo. So I was very familiar with her. Fast forward to 2006, and we brought my, at the time, 6-year-old daughter to San Antonio. This will always be my hometown. Took her through the Alamo, bought a book on Clara Driscoll, the savior of the Alamo. Still no mention of Adina de Zavala. Now, I will tell you that I knew the de Zavala name. Everyone does. Lorenzo de Zavala, first vice president of the Republic of Texas. So the de Zavala name is pretty common in San Antonio, not so much Adina. So I decided that I was going to continue to explore the story. So my first paper on her was about the second battle for the Alamo, and I kind of went head-to-head on Clara Driscoll, which I won't do so much today. But as I decided what I was going to write my master's thesis on, it occurred to me that there was a lot more to Adina's story than that one piece of history conveys. And so I really wanted to explore her motivation. So I wrote my 130-page thesis, which I'm happy to read to you now. I'm just kidding. I'm not really going to do that. But it's here if you're interested. And it's also searchable. It's interesting that we're having this conference during Hispanic Heritage Month because what I sought to show in my thesis was something very interesting, and that was her name only started emerging in history and among historians in the early 2000s when Tejano history started to be studied in earnest. More and more social history being told, what were the Tejanos' contributions to the formation of the Republic of Texas and then the state of Texas. And all of a sudden, there are all these historians that are commandeering her as this activist for all that is Tejano and Tejana. They were celebrating her as one of their own. And I mean no disrespect in this, but by combing through all of her papers, and I mean all of them, thousands, snippets of crazy pieces of paper written upside down on backs of maps and all over, both at the Briscoe Center in Austin, at UTA Special Archives, at Incarnate Word, and then here when I finally got access to the DRT library here, that took a little doing, come to find out that is not at all who she was, and that is not at all what she was standing for. So, as I said, I went through pretty exhaustive research to try and explain and to find out why was the preservation of Texas history so very important to her? Why was the Alamo so important to her? And then why didn't she stop there? She didn't. She lived from 1861 to 1955, and for the better part of her adult years, she spent her life battling, one battle after the next. I'm going to start with this picture of her. There are thousands of pictures that I have, thousands of documents that I have. This obviously is in the latter part of her life. She's standing in front of the door of the Spanish governor's palace. Over the time that I wrote about her and studied her and lived her for 8 years, trying to figure her out, she was a lot of things. She was a difficult woman. She was obstreperous. That's one of my favorite words. She was passionate. She was myopically driven. And that, at that period of time, was not what polite women did. She got shut down, and even now, really, if you think about it, but let's do it anyway. She never married. She never had children. I'll get to that in a little bit. This picture, as I loved her and hated her and was confused by her, and she made me crazy as I was trying to get this thesis written, and I saw this picture and it brought a tear to my eye because I thought as difficult and lonely her life was, there was somebody that was happy to see her each day. And I don't know, I mean, there were days where she was pretty much, people saw her coming and they turned the other way. So I found this picture particularly touching. So this is Adina in her early days. She was a beautiful woman. What's important to know about Adina is that her father, Augustine Jr., who was the son of Lorenzo de Zavala, was only half Mexican. And I use the term quite deliberately. Lorenzo has been painted as a Spaniard. He was a third-generation Spaniard from Yucatan, so arguably was mestizo, but Adina made him Spanish. So Augustine's mother was Caucasian. His father was Hispanic. Augustine marries Julia Terrell, who is Irish. So, quite frankly, Adina was only 1/4 of Latin American or Hispanic heritage. I want to talk to you a little bit about just her early life before she gets into historic preservation, because I think it's instructive just to know that it was pretty unremarkable. So we have Lorenzo de Zavala, he does great things for the Republic of Texas. Adina was born in 1861 at Zavala Point, which was the family dwelling. She was the first child of Julia Terrell and Augustine. And I'm sorry, I can't see my notes here, so I'm going to have to do that thing that I hate when presenters do, which is to look at my own slides. And somewhere around 1862, we think, I can't find the record, Augustine enlists in the Confederate Army. What's interesting is that landed property owners, people of elite status, didn't come in as privates, which he did. They usually came in as officials, with title. He did not. He had a pretty unremarkable service record. He mustered out as a corporal. In 1871, I find this interesting. In 1871, her first sibling was born. That would be Mary Catherine, who was her lifelong best friend, possibly only friend, roommate, confidant, followed by Florence, Zita, Thomas, and Augustine Jr. Florence and Zita died relatively young, so Adina was left in her early adult years with sister Mary Catherine, brothers Thomas and Augustine Jr. Very Catholic family, extremely Catholic family. So at the time they were in the Galveston area, and she began attending the Ursuline Academy, where she was very influenced by the nuns. And in fact, in her correspondence, there are hundreds of letters throughout the course of her lifetime where she stayed in touch with the nuns who had instructed her, even tried to press her into a life of religious service, and that was not something that she chose. The family moves from the Galveston area to the Lock Hill area of San Antonio in 1873. So that was kind of a remarkable move for them, but it was to capitalize on economic opportunity, the availability of land, et cetera, in this area. From 1879 to 1881, Adina decided that the teaching profession was her calling, and so she attended the Sam Houston Normal School, which is now, Sam Houston State University in Huntsville. Right about this time, through a series of family discussions, it becomes apparent that there are these land grants that Lorenzo de Zavala had been given, a headright, quite frankly, which is thousands and thousands of acres, that were just unaccounted for. Now, part of it had to do with some mismanagement and some kind of shady deals on his part, but Adina was convinced through the provocation of her half-uncle, Henry de Zavala, who was a lawyer in New York, that by gosh, those lands are out there and we're going to find them. And Adina thought this could be the opportunity to finally have what's ours as a family. Bear in mind, her father, prior to going into the Confederate Army, had been a caulker in the shipyard. Hardly an esteemed, very worthy profession, but not that of elite society. All of a sudden, they think, we've got land. We finally can get what we've lost. So she begins communicating with Henry, who, again, was half-brother, half-uncle, and he had an ulterior motive. He wanted to get his sticky mitts on that land for himself. 1884, she begins teaching in Terrell, Texas, which is up in Dallas-Fort Worth neck of the woods, rural area. Didn't really care for it too much, based on all of the diary entries that I read. She's now completely obsessed with the land that was lost. So she starts writing to Governor Orem Roberts, which is it's a lot of moxie for a woman in that day, and she wrote emphatically. A couple of years later, he actually sent her a letter that must have been crushing to her. At the time, she would have been, it was in the early 1890s, that basically said, this is really kind of cute that you're really interested in helping your family, but your highest calling as a woman should be to have children and get married and have children. Let's put it in the right order. And, as a woman who was already in her mid-30s, for whom that wasn't an option, clearly, either by choice or by circumstance, that must have been a crushing blow. And he basically said, I can't help you. She moves back to San Antonio in 1886, arguably to help care for her family. Her father, Augustine, at that time was in very poor health. Her mother didn't work, obviously, and so she moved back, and the money that she made as a teacher helped take care of the family. 1889. She had worked as a teacher. She was rolling around in trying to discover what happened to Lorenzo de Zavala's land. So she starts learning about his history, and she sees in San Antonio the opportunity to actually help care for, beginning with, the missions, but starting with Mission San Jose. She cobbled together this band of very passionate but not particularly well-funded women in 1889 to work on mission preservation. And I won't say that they had bake sales, but it was about that sophisticated in trying to get the money necessary and just get the volunteers necessary to help save Mission San Jose. 1892, they formed the de Zavala chapter of the Daughters of the Republic of Texas. And that's when things start getting real interesting. Those of you who have ever been part of women's organizations know that it often devolves to women hating women. And it did in this particular case. 1894, her father dies, and that marked a real turning point in her life because, number one, she had to figure out how to take care of her family, but number two, how to make herself basically from an unremarkable family, except for the de Zavala name, no money. I mean, she was not a member of the cultural elite. She had a Tejana, a Mexican last name, in a very racially divided San Antonio. How is she going to make herself relevant as an unmarried woman with a limited future? At this same time, what's happening is very interesting in the nation. We are starting to see an interest in Texas history. There's some historians that will tell you that publishers became interested in telling Texas history as a way to distance us from that nasty thing called the Civil War and slavery, and to divorce Texas from its southernness and create a different history altogether. So you start seeing more publishers, more authors wanting to write about the battle for the Republic of Texas, Texas history, etc. So she starts getting people contacting her saying, tell us about your grandfather. Well, she didn't know. She didn't know. I mean, her father, Augustine, was 4 when Lorenzo de Zavala died, so she starts digging. 1900, another turning point for her. She decides she's going to get this land issue taken care of for once and for all, so she goes and she meets half-uncle Henry in New York. He's an attorney who continues to basically suggest via correspondence that she knows more about what happened to the land than she's letting on. About this time, as she's digging into the family history, she discovers some kind of dirty little secrets about Lorenzo, not the least of which is that Henry was adopted. He was actually either conceived out of wedlock with Lorenzo and Emily West, or was Emily's son from another man, unmarried and adopted. Nonetheless, it was shameful to a very Catholic, very devout woman who now realized that Lorenzo de Zavala was going to be the platform on which she was going to build her own legacy. So just a snapshot. That is Julia, mom, and then Augustine. You know, I don't want to be judgy. Augustine doesn't look all right to me, but maybe it was just, I'm just saying, you know, maybe it was just, it took a long time to take pictures, but it's interesting because one does not get from anything that she wrote that it was a warm and nurturing family. And so, and certainly not one that had the luxury of rolling around in its history. They were trying to survive, quite frankly. That is her house in Galveston. So again, she was not cloaked in luxury like Clara Driscoll was. Hers was kind of a hard scrabble life. And that's dear Lorenzo. In this picture, looks a little bit lighter skinned than he most likely was. So what happens next? So let's talk about the cultural context of what led to Adina's motivations. San Antonio had an influx of immigrants at the turn of the century, like crazy. I mean, explosive growth. And yet, the prevailing Caucasian thought was all Mexicans are the same. Whether they have land, whether they don't, they're all the same. Mid-1890s, there's a renewed interest, and again, it kind of goes to revisionist history a little bit. We have this renewed interest in the Spanish colonial period and the romanticism of all that was Spain, because by gosh, it's not Mexico. And so we start seeing more focus on that. Kind of started in California with boosterism, but it was this notion of how do we create tourism out of these Spanish missions, these Spanish monuments, fortresses, etc. Many call this the Spanish myth, that it was Mexico, but we're going to call it Spain, and that makes it European, which makes it better. So what we're seeing at this time in San Antonio, and I'm talking late 1800s, turn of the century, we're starting to see what is institutionalized discrimination, where Tejanos are forced to sell prime land, move across the river, Anglos are coming in and sweeping it up. You're seeing explosive growth. You're also seeing Anglo-dominated banks who will not lend to Tejanos. And so you see what becomes a city very racially divided, which is interesting because it had the greatest population of Tejanos/Mexicans of anywhere in Texas. It was a city divided, and many said that there was a San Antonio, and you cross the river, there's a Mexican San Antonio, never the twain shall meet. So what's interesting, and I'm sure you probably heard some discussion about this in sessions this morning, is what the Alamo really represents. And it really does sit at the epicenter of a racial binary. That whole "Remember the Alamo" battle cry really can be seen as a threat that, we will retaliate, and we did in San Jacinto. My thinking, and I think other real historians would probably agree, that we wouldn't monumentalize the Alamo had we not won in San Jacinto. That validated us. Otherwise, it was the scene of an epic defeat on our own soil. The Alamo becomes a reminder not just of Mexican victory, but also ultimate Anglo triumph. And here it sits in the middle of a racially divided city. So what's worth preserving, and for whom do we preserve it? So enter Adina de Zavala and the Daughters of the Republic of Texas, God love them all. You all have seen this picture, sitting right in the middle of San Antonio. It is a storied, hallowed ground that is a smelly grocery warehouse. 1891, the Houston group of women, very culturally elite, formed the Daughters of the Republic of Texas, and they asked Adina's group to join in 1892. That's about the same time that journalists and tourists start publishing scathing commentaries about how does San Antonio allow this to happen to a place where men gave their lives. How on earth, it's shameful, you all should be ashamed of yourselves. Well, Adina wasn't going to stand for that, and many others weren't as well. So again, a lot of different things happening at this time. The beginning of historical activism as part of nation building, defining what is American. And you're also seeing a lot of women's groups forming at this time to be part of that. 1892, so DRT is already up and running. Adina's at the helm. She approaches Gustav Schmelzer to basically say, I want the first right, we, DRT, want the first right of refusal on the Alamo. And, yeah, okay, if I sell it, maybe. Well, then Clara Driscoll comes to town, and she comes in, as Jim will tell you, with great wealth and prestige and status behind her. Well, she comes to town. She's been on a grand tour that Jim will talk about, and she too is aghast at what the Alamo looks like. She's been to Europe. She thinks this should be something beautiful, and it's not. So she and Adina become acquainted. Here's where it gets interesting. Adina invites her in. Adina recognizes in Clara power and status that Adina doesn't have. What Adina has is passion and historical perspective. So Adina gets appointed to the DRT. They join forces, 1903, to secure the purchase of the Alamo. And Clara becomes treasurer of the DRT. So she's got the purse strings, and she's got personal money. 1903, it was just impossible for the DRT to come up with the money, so Clara fronts the money for the option to purchase the Alamo. One of the sadder things, I'm just going to digress for a second, again, and getting to know Adina and working through her papers, was that the DRT hosted a series of fundraisers to try and raise the money, one of which was a ball. And Adina was on the host committee. And I've never seen one of these before or since, but in her materials in Arlington is a dance card from this particular ball. And they're beautiful. Have y'all ever seen the original dance cards with a silk ribbon and a little tiny pencil and line for each song? And hers was completely empty. Nobody had had danced with Adina. And I would like to think it was because she was so busy badgering everyone into listening to what she had to say. But it also could be that nobody wanted to dance with Adina, and that just makes me very sad. So 1904, they still can't raise the money, and once again, Clara writes a check. And she writes it for, and this is where she kind of takes a right turn from Adina, for the use and benefit of DRT for the purpose of making a park about the Alamo and for no other purpose. That's not what Adina was fighting for. She was fighting to preserve the old convento, the long barracks, which were now covered up by this horrid warehouse, because she knew that that is where all of those men died. She knew that where we're sitting right now was 3 funeral pyres where all of those men were set on fire by Santa Anna. And by God, we're not going to take that down and make a park and then a hotel. This is hallowed ground. And so this would have been an epic slap in the face so you get to pony up the money, but then you're not being historically accurate in what you're preserving. So this is where it starts to get real ugly. So the state legislature appropriates the money to complete the purchase of the Alamo, and the governor signed the bill giving statewide DRT the custodial control. Not de Zavala chapter, statewide DRT. So possession is transferred, but because she wrote the check, the custodial rights are actually given to Clara. Well, Adina wasn't going to have any of that. And so, because she knew what Clara was going to do was to raise the barracks, turn it into a park, or sell the land for a hotel. So she refuses to give over the keys. And then the court kind of says, you got to do it, court order. So she did. We continue to the state convention, and this is where epic catfight takes place. Remember that Adina was still on the executive committee of the DRT, and in some manipulation of Robert's Rules of Order, they just kind of voted her and her compadres right out of the picture and basically introduced a new slate of control for the DRT. It breaks my heart. I mean, Adina fought and fought and fought. So she files a petition with the court for continued custodianship of the Alamo, which was rejected. She is writing letters. She is going to Austin. She's talking to legislators that she doesn't have the right to help elect because we don't have the right to vote yet. She is lobbying. She is doing things that polite women don't do to get attention for what needed to be saved. Here, the kid gloves come off. So finally, Schmelzer vacates the Alamo. Adina enters and barricades herself inside the Alamo for 3 days. Now, is this moxie or what, y'all? This is like the biggest PR move on the planet. I don't know that I would do it, and I'm in public relations, but there are those that are kind of cynical and say, well, people were feeding her and giving her water and that kind of thing. Doesn't matter. She was in that Alamo in the dark for 3 days. She got headlines all over the country. The court orders her to evacuate. Here we go again. The new governor decided that they would hold the land until litigation had concluded. So this is a quagmire. I don't exactly know where Clara is in all of this, so Jim will tell us on that. Once again, the courts ruled against the de Zavala chapter. The state releases the Alamo to the DRT in 1910. The new governor aligns with Adina. Hallelujah. Because she just badgered the crud out of him. And he heard what she had to say. And so he seized the title and ordered immediate restoration of the old convento, the long barracks. Hallelujah, somebody finally got it. And Adina's thinking, I may have lost the battle, but I'm winning the war. Well, not so much. 1912, DRT returns to court to obtain control with the caveat that, we'll do what we're told to do. We'll keep those long barracks intact. We'll take down the warehouse, and yeah, we hear ya. Well, in 1913, while Colquitt was out of town, the lieutenant governor had his head kind of turned and said he issued a decree to remove the upper story walls from the long barracks. So what you see today is only partially historically accurate. They were two floors, and there no longer, largely because I don't exactly know what the motivation for this was, probably a follow the money kind of thing, but in the end, it was kind of a win for Adina because we now can enjoy where the true sacrifice took place, but it was also a loss because we only have part of it. So this is Adina in middle age at about the time that that she would have been in the midst of these fights. Looking at the motivation behind the preservation of the Alamo from Clara's point of view and Adina's point of view, and recognize that I'm a little biased, but I try not to be. For Clara Driscoll, coming off of Europe, her European Grand Tour, it was sentimentality for sale, aesthetics and commerce over historical accuracy. Remember, she wanted a park. She wanted history to be pretty. Well, all of us know history is anything but. Adina knew that. She did leverage her personal wealth, her blue blood heritage, her status, to help until she decided to take a right turn, quite frankly. She worked within what is called women's sphere. So polite society, there are certain things women just didn't do. Women didn't actively lobby. Women didn't walk the halls of the legislature. Women didn't write the kind of just bombastic letters and editorials that Adina wrote. Clara knew how to work within the women's organizations. She knew how to maneuver her way through polite society and to use her status to help her. It's my personal feeling that the battle over the Alamo kind of gave her political street cred. She did go on to marry Hal Sevier, who was the successor to John Nance Garner's congressional seat, and went on to have a very storied life in the political realm. But it also shows that at the time, and probably even now, socioeconomic status trumps sweat equity. Adina definitely had the sweat equity. She didn't have the status, despite trying to leverage her name to get the status. For Adina, it was history to be honored, save what is the most sacred. Again, she was a devout Catholic. She really needed this history to be right so that she could be part. This gave her a relevance that she did not have otherwise. She leveraged her knowledge of her family history, all of the Texas history that she had uncovered. She wrote a couple of pretty extensive books, and also her facility with lobbying. Again, even though she couldn't vote for the very people that she was pestering. She stepped outside of the bounds of women's sphere. She was very, and I hate gender descriptions like this, but she was very male in the way she approached the battle, I suppose. I mean, she wasn't trying to make friends. She was trying to get it right. She got national notoriety over the battle for the Alamo, but she was ostracized here. And it is a testament that sweat equity isn't enough if you don't have friends. She absolutely did not have friends. So going forward, this battle wasn't her last. It didn't stop her from going on to form another organization once she got pretty much kicked out of the DRT. It ultimately became the Texas Historical and Landmarks Association. So they dutifully went and tromped through like awful graves and so great cemeteries that were overgrown to put markers up to honor heroes. She attempted for 10 years to secure purchase of the Spanish governor's palace to help renovate that, even though historically it's a little inaccurate what she was saying. It ended up getting taken out of her hands and turned over to the San Antonio Conservation Society after she had dedicated 10 years to that. Still trying to find her land, by the way. That never went away. She was really shut down at every turn. And yet, 1945, she's still plugging along. Actually, this is before. That's her home, by the way. I just threw that in there to show, again, a fairly modest life. This is her in her later years at the centennial celebration, as a matter of fact. Just a petite little, fairly innocent-looking thing. She was bad to the bone, quite frankly. So 1945, Clara Driscoll dies. And she hadn't been on the San Antonio scene for a really long time. She was laid in state at the Alamo for several days. Big, huge to do, given the moniker of the savior of the Alamo, which you all will see or have seen. Adina dies in 1955, 10 years later. She died with the Sisters of Incarnate Word, almost in a hospice kind of situation, completely alone. 9 people attended her service and signed her guest book. Her memorial service drove by the Alamo, but she was given no recognition for that. In her papers, she had paid to have her cemetery, her plot, and her family's plot cared for in perpetuity. So she paid years in advance. Well, I went to see her yesterday. I actually went to see her when I was working on the thesis to say, Adina, I can't figure you out. And it was pretty bad then. Well, we went yesterday, and it is overgrown with weeds. It is deplorable. This is St. Mary's Cemetery. It's deplorable that even in her death, she is treated so poorly. In conclusion, she was a remarkable woman who fought hard for what she believed in, sought to try and define herself at a time when the two things that she had going for her were the De Zavala last name and the fact that she was working to preserve Texas history through Spanish missions and sites. Well, that was a double whammy that only served to hurt her, but she didn't understand it. She was not Tejana. She did not learn Spanish until she was in her 30s, never a member of LULAC. She was a member of the United Daughters of the Confederacy, which is kind of crazy when you think about it, who also opposed suffrage. She was not an activist of any kind except really for what she believed to be right for future historians and students in Texas. So I hope that this gives you a little bit more of a sense of her complexity and really what she brings when we think about saving Texas history, which is why we're here today. We're kind of here because she kind of started it, in my view. So I'll leave with this. It really crawls all over me because it's damnation with faint praise, in my view, that they both helped in their own way. In my view, it was a symbiotic relationship. One could not have done without the other to save what we now get to enjoy. So thank you very much.
No, you were right on time. All right, thank you very much for that. It was fantastic. So we're going to take a few questions now before the next talk. So we've got a colleague up here. Yes, ma'am. We've got a microphone coming for you.
Did Adina get the family land back?
Nope. It is what, and I'm still trying to figure it out, and I'm hoping our good friends at the General Land Office might be able to help. It appears that there were some crazy business dealings sort of under the table with Mirabeau Lamar and others, and Lorenzo, and things passed around and it kind of just got lost. But it wasn't as I thought, which was, that it had been seized or taken away. But no, she never got it. And the corresponding wealth of that land, I'm trying to remember for the purpose of my thesis, it was like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was down in near Galveston, De Zavala Point, near San Jacinto. It would have been in excess of 6,000 acres. We got the sumo suits. We're going to do the history smackdown. No, again, they needed each other. They just didn't really seem to recognize that.
Just to comment here, I'm with the Couriers DRT, and every year at Dina's birthday, we have a ceremony at her gravesite, and some of our members have gotten a historical plaque, and we also go over to the other lady, Clara Driscoll, at her tomb and have a ceremony also.
Thank you. I appreciate that. After Adina's death, she was the legislature asked that her gravesite be honored along with something at the Alamo, and it didn't actually happen until 2008.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I was a former member of the Markers Committee for the Bexar County Historical Commission and helped write up the application for the marker for Adina de Zavala that was placed there in Alamo Plaza. It was meant to be placed up on the 18-inch parapet that it was there, certainly on city property. I didn't want to go into the those who had on-the-curb jurisdiction at the time. But it was to where a person could stand there and read it and look over to see the long barracks or the convento that she fought for so long. It was amazing that it wound up being down below. We had a situation, I found out afterwards, where granddaughters were fighting grandmothers' battles.
Wow.
Yes, and so the decision to actually, even though the photograph goes with the application of the spot that's approved at the state level,
Okay.
it got moved off and put down on the ground to where you could stand on the curb of the state property and not see the marker. The other is, in the application, it had attached the joint resolution between the Senate and the House there in Austin upon her death in 1955 for, whereas, et cetera, all the way down, that they passed that in her memory for all these great achievements, that a plaque recognizing her should be placed inside the Church of the Alamo. This was 1955. Obviously, it is yet to happen.
That's right. Well,
But thank you for your work.
thank you. And if we can keep the battle going. I got a little bit of Adina in me now, so okay. I think she haunts me. Any other questions?
Yeah. I was thinking on the many field trips when I have gone to San Jacinto Monument, I thought part of the spiel they give us is that De Zavala's house was there on the bluff
It was.
at San
It is.
Jacinto.
Yes.
So, assuming that would be part of his land grant?
No, she had that land, but it was expansive.
More expansive.
Throughout Texas. It wasn't just
Well, no,
contiguous.
not just there, but.
So, yes.
Okay, so yeah. All right, thank you.
But, yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed your presentation. It was really interesting the way you explain it. But I just got to say this. Even though she may not have spoken Spanish, she was born in Texas. She was a Tejana. And you said something about she didn't speak Mexican. No, it's Spanish.
I beg your pardon for
Spanish.
misspeaking. She was only a quarter Hispanic
A
ancestry, and that wasn't, my point wasn't that she was or wasn't genetically. It was, that's not how, that wasn't her motivation, and that's not what inspired her efforts.
Well, I know that. There's a lot of Tejanos roaming around Texas that are Tejanos, but they have names like Schmidt, and they're Tejanos, but they don't know they're Tejanos.
That point
So I
well taken.
imagine this is the same case with Adina, but like I said, you also mentioned Mexican, and it's not Mexican, it's Spanish.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay?
All right, we're going to have time for more questions at the end.
Thank you.